Good afternoon, everyone. I know we're about 30 minutes away from our coffee break, so I just wanted to thank you all for hanging in here with us while we go through our panel. My name is Amy Linker, and I am the Museum Registrar at the CCS Bard Hessel Museum at Bard College. Thank you so much for joining us today for our panel discussion on shipping and registration crossover training. When thinking about interesting topics for the ARCS conference, a few of us realized that we had something in common. We had all worked both as registrars and shipping logistics coordinators. For myself, I began my career as a registrar. After 13 years, I moved to shipping and logistics for a brief period, then transitioned back to registration. What I learned from that transition was invaluable. We also realized that we had quite a few colleagues who have also had this crossover experience. Just out of curiosity, can I get a quick show of hands of how many of you have worked on both sides of the industry? Oh, great. There are actually not that many of you, okay. But this is great. I want to hear from you all at the end, please. What was it that sparked us to make this transition? What qualities could we bring from our past positions? Did it translate? How can we share this experience with our colleagues? From these questions, the idea behind this discussion began, and also the question, how can these types of experiences play a role in helping to strengthen the relationship between registrars and shipping logistics coordinators? We asked many of our fellow colleagues a series of questions regarding their thoughts on challenges they face in their current positions, projected future challenges, overall frustrations, and how to remedy those frustrations. We received many great, thoughtful responses, but what it mainly came down to was communication. And it might not come as a surprise to you, but communication is often the underlying factor of most issues. But for our intents and purposes of this this panel, we'll be mostly focusing on workflow, budget, and time management. Our hope is that this panel will provoke a larger conversation to address these broader concerns from both both sides of the industry, and hopefully offer a platform for cross-training education. Whether new or experienced, this industry is constantly changing. And if it is one thing I know, we're all pretty much A-type personalities that hunger for information. And in reality, we're all magicians in our own right. This panel consists of esteemed colleagues who at one point in their career have transitioned from one position to another within this industry. They will each touch upon their transitions, how they benefited and learned or struggled, and discuss a few key topics that came up often in our survey responses. We will be conducting this panel as a dialogue and hope to leave enough time to bring you, the audience, into the conversation. So at this point, I'd like to start the dialogue by introducing my colleague, Naomi. Naomi, you and I followed a very similar career trajectory. Would you mind sharing how your transition experience has helped you in your current position? And what are some of the challenges that you are seeing having worked on both sides of the industry?
Hi, my name is Naomi Abe. So I started out as a registrar and switched team, went to the logistics side for a bit. Now I'm back to the registration, and I'm at the Getty Villa in Los Angeles. So first of all, I want to say to all the shippers out here that I really feel for you. I know your pain. Oh, yeah. So I'm really glad to have experienced problem solving from the logistics side, because it really helps me anticipate challenges or problems in advance, sort of, and try to come up with a different solution options. And shipping is hard work, and I have a deeper appreciation for all the work shippers do daily to help the registrar. So I think it's really important to cultivate and maintain good relationship, because they really do help me do my job. And as far as challenges goes, I think we are all under the pressure of getting things done in shorter cycle. Museums are increasingly doing ambitious shows in a short period of time. It's getting worse and worse. Meanwhile, it's getting more difficult to get accurate information. And I think it's because institutions are not having an internal conversation about how these more complicated issue impact the workflow, internal workflow. And the part of the problem is that I think lots of museum colleagues don't really understand what registrars do exactly. Like when things are going smoothly, no one really notices us because we're doing an amazing job. And sometimes, like only time we get attention is like something goes awry. It's like, oh my God, what happened? But then the registrar is such a good problem solver that we do make magic happen, but this could potentially create a vicious cycle where we keep losing opportunity to prepare in advance because we made it happen before, so we kind of raise the bar for everybody. And the other thing is that registrars are always under pressure to minimize and even justify the shipping costs. And the quality and the quantity of information we receive heavily impact what kind of assumption we make during the budgeting process. But getting other institutions to meet your deadline is always difficult. So this in turn creates a situation where the shippers receiving this incomplete checklist and expected to formulate this detailed shipping plan, then issue an estimate. So this goes right back to the issue of internal workflow and scheduling, where registrars are always having to constantly ask money or time, but we don't necessarily get heard all the time. So my sentiment really is like we have to advocate for ourselves within our own institution and let others understand how certain budgetary or scheduling decision impact not only the internal workflow, but also the performance of the other parties, like such as shipping agents or partner institutions. So that's my sentiment.
Serena?
Yes.
Is this on? I just want to make sure. Serena, I would like to turn to you for a different perspective. You have a very established background in registration and have recently transitioned to the position of fine art shipping. From your current perspective, in what direction are you seeing the dialogue between shipper and registrar moving, or how would you like to see it move forward?
Well, yeah, first of all, I have a tremendous respect for what the registrars, all of you registrars and collections professionals do out there, and I feel your pain, as having worked on the other side of the aisle for, I don't know, more years than I want to remember. I do understand and greatly respect all of the work that goes into what registrars do at both large and small institutions, and I completely empathize with all of the things that Naomi has said just previously in, being underrepresented or not heard and having to work on these tighter deadlines with more ambitious projects and greater or less access to resources. So as my role as a shipping coordinator now, I feel like that I've transitioned from one of asking for something to being able to help to provide and make you meet those deadlines and those challenges that you have, and you down there, and out there. And like Naomi said, I can take the past experiences and apply them to now what I am doing in my current role. However, my situation is completely the reverse, really, of what you did. I worked as a registrar for a number of years, and now I'm in a completely different position, and I'm a shipping coordinator, and I am being the support staff for the registrars, where before I was asking for the help. And I agree completely that the challenges often come down to communication, and that the dialogue that we can have between shipping and registrars. Because an open dialogue, an early dialogue, and communication that is free-flowing is really only going to benefit both of us. And so, like everyone has said before in Amy's opening, as well as in what Naomi was talking about, the dialogue is the most important factor. And ideally, every shipping conversation would start with a perfect checklist where you have all full and complete information early on, and but I full well know that that's almost never going to happen today. And I mean, it probably never happened when I was working as a registrar either. But we should all strive for that. And I mean, one of the things that I think is easiest to do is say like, hey, we're presenting you with this information and we know it's not complete. Because sometimes, you know, I'll get a list and I think it's complete. Like I did an entire budget this year. And then the list changed and somehow I didn't know. And then they were like, well, what about these loans from, you know, France? And I was like, you didn't have any French loans on this checklist a month ago? And they're like, oh yes, now we do. And it was, you know, I'm not a mind reader. I can't, and I don't go to the meetings. And so I have to rely on my dialogue and my communication with our registrars and to get the information that they need. And so from this side of the aisle, for lack of a better term, I will say that I do see these increasing challenges that registrars have. I see that you have these more ambitious projects, these enormous projects, and you have shorter deadlines, and you have tighter resources. And our role really here is to help you navigate these challenges. And I feel really protective of the registrars that I work with and the museums that I work with, and I really want to help you meet these challenges. So whatever you need from us is like what I'm willing to, you know, I want to help. And so we should be talking early on and talking often about what we can do to make your life easier. And so that's where I come from as a shipping professional now. And one of the other things that I found really disconcerting when I started this job is that as a shipping person now, I don't have a level of intimacy with the projects that I used to have. Like registrars, in one way, have this luxury of, you know, they're talking in these meetings and they know the loan agreements, they know all this information about each work and each project, maybe each loan that will go out for an outgoing loan or each acquisition, and we just can never have that level of intimacy. We're not going to be day in and day out in your museum, you know, looking at the checklist in the same way you are. But while at first I thought it kind of almost paralyzed me. I was like, oh, I can't do my job if I don't have this much information. But I realized that I don't need that level of intimacy with a project. I need some level, but not that much. And I've been able to try to transition that into a tool that like makes me realize what I don't know and what I should be asking. And so we as shippers have to like fill in the gaps of what we should know, but we might not have. And so it's, again, back to communication of having a good dialogue with those that we are working with. I know I ramble on a little bit, but the last kind of thing I wanted to say, and at first I didn't know what to say in this panel, and then I realized I had too much to say, so I'm trying to, you know, bring it down into something manageable. But I really feel fortunate that I got to work at many different places in my career. You know, from a museum with a staff of 20 to a museum with a registrar staff of almost 20. So, but unfortunately, those experiences were all the same in a lot of ways, and I'm kind of slightly embarrassed to admit that I worked a long time in museums thinking that every shipment had to be a full museum level shipment, like you needed full supervision, exclusive use trucking, blah, blah, blah. And, you know, don't tell any of my former bosses, which are probably in this room, but, you know, I'm sure I booked like a really expensive shipment for a low value work that might have not even been an original, and it was probably the shipment was worth more, or the shipment cost more than the object was worth and all this, because I didn't know any better. And when I was a young registrar, I didn't know what questions to ask. And I just thought that if you work in a museum, this is how it's done. And now being on the other side, I know that it is important to like discuss with registrars early on exactly what each shipment needs and what should be anticipated for these shipments, because maybe not every shipment needs full supervision and exclusive use trucking and an armed security follow guard across Europe. You know, some do, some don't. And, you know, this should be a learning experience and a dialogue from both sides so that we know exactly what to provide and how, and this will help our clients and our registrars to meet their timelines and their budgets and all of those things that are challenges. And, you know, we just want to give I want to just give the registrars and our clients the tools to, you know, do their job and do their job well. And so really, in conclusion for me, the crossover between registrar and shipper is one of like past knowledge, and I have taken what I had wanted and what I had needed and what I required to do my job as a registrar, and to try to try to take that and make that how I do my job now. And I feel really fortunate that I worked as a registrar for so many years before I took this job, as I don't know that I would have ever been able to do this job had I stepped into it cold. So I feel like I'm fortunate in that way.
Serena, thank you so much. Now I'm going to move on to Kim. Kim, you have vast in-depth knowledge and experience as a fine art shipper. You started your career as a shipper, moved to registration, then back to fine art shipping. Given this experience, how does that factor in with your work with clients? And also, can you discuss some of the challenges you are seeing currently from your perspective and how they could affect budgets and timelines, et cetera?
Thanks, Amy. Everyone, I'm Kim Shantz. I'm with Atelier 4 in New York. I'm a longtime listener, first-time speaker, so bear with me, please. I started my career as an art shipper and moved on after a few years to becoming a registrar. Having had a few years of shipping under my belt, I found as a registrar it was much easier for me to communicate my needs with my shipping agents. I knew the information they needed to help me establish realistic budgets for our shows and our art fairs. But on the other hand, this background in shipping made me approach projects with a question: what could possibly go wrong? So I want to go off script for a minute here. The art shipping industry is a relationship-driven business. I've had the opportunity to work in some capacity with each of the women on this stage as either a client, a coworker, or as a collaborator. I've learned so much from each of them, and it really is a privilege to sit here with them today. Okay, let's get back on track. Former registrar, now shipper. I think I now relate to registrars in a different way. I've walked in their shoes. I understand and respect the difficulties of their jobs in a way that I hadn't before. So it brings me back to that question: what could possibly go wrong? I try my best to address this with our clients in a very honest and transparent way. There are a number of factors that can influence your budgets and your planning and your timelines, and that's when it's time for your plan B. I'm always trying to anticipate complications and be ready for them. Registrars are being asked to do so much more with less. You have less money, less time, and less staff. I see and appreciate how much effort each and every one of you are putting into the way you are giving us our information, the time you're taking deciphering from your curators and passing that information on to us, and you are doing your due diligence, but even the best laid plans. So Amy and the rest of us, we did a survey of a number of our registrar friends, and budget issues popped up a lot, things that are affecting our budgets. So I was asked to touch on some of these things. So I'm now calling this the doom and gloom section of the panel. Challenges we're facing. Changes in airline equipment. Back in April, I started working on a budget for a client where a number of crates, about 110 inches tall, we had the whole thing planned out. We were going to fly into Frankfurt. By the time it came around to book the shipment, it's October. Lufthansa has now switched to an MD-11, which means we come up with a whole new plan. Different routing, a whole new group of agents. We're revisiting our budgets. So that's back to the drawing board. We're also facing issues with cancellation of service due to changes in equipment failure. Not enough cargo being booked on these flights, so the flight's not profitable, they don't fly. Being bumped due to things such as human remains, perishables, even groups of Arabian horses. We're also facing environmental factors today that we weren't before. We can all remember, the volcano incident, and we have massive wildfires creating no-fly zones that are postponing and canceling flights. I also wanted to talk about the issue with mixed media. Mixed media is thrown out a lot, and sometimes we show up to a residence and there's a canvas and it's embedded with butterfly wings or peacock feathers. Or we have a sculpture and it's now made up of unicorn horns. So U.S. Fish and Wildlife and CITES comes into play. We all love those. This may affect your budget. It will definitely affect your schedule. It can also affect the packing scheme. You need travel frames. Your crate gets bigger. You're no longer booking on a passenger flight. You're now looking at cargo service. These are all things that continue to affect the budget. Or let's say your curator tells you a lender has an existing crate. We go pick up that crate. It's from 1985. It's not HT stamped. It's missing the lid, and there's no skid. So now you're looking at budgeting for a brand new crate. If we had a little bit more time, we would touch upon our current political climate. We're now dealing with new duties, the unknowns surrounding Brexit. I could go on about this, but Amy, you and I were talking and you did mention it in your introduction. We're all magicians. Shippers work magic for their registrars. Registrars work magic for their curators. So let's all just keep pulling those rabbits out of our hats.
Kim, thank you so much. Maggie, you have a wealth of experience in both registration and shipping. How do you feel we can move forward in order to establish better working relationships between shippers and registrars?
Thanks, Amy. I'm Maggie Rad. I'm the Director of Registration and Exhibitions at the Museum of Jewish Heritage in New York. Just to echo my fellow panelists, I've also had the opportunity to work with each of them over my 20-plus year career, and I've learned a lot from both of them. I am in the not so unique among this panel anyway group, where in some cases, I've worked with each of the ladies on this panel, both as a registrar and as a shipper. The partnership between shippers and registrars is the backbone of our work in museums. We're each logistical masterminds that the museum's curators and executive staff turn to create magic, there's that word again, out of a paper checklist. The industry is changing. As a species, we've evolved from the quiet librarian types, none of which you'll find at this table, versus the blue-collar, rough-and-tumble truckers, none of which we'll find out in the gallery today. We've evolved into a more thorough and thoughtful blending of skill sets and partnerships. After all, the main difference between us could be summed up in an admittedly oversimplified way by they who need the service and they who provide the service. The widespread increase of crossover and crossover training is elevating both sides of our community. Registrars are taking a more active stance rather than a passive one. Gone are the days when registrars would simply send their info to the agents and say, take it away, make this happen. As a shipper, I was once the only constant in a multi-venue traveling exhibition with musical chair registrars. The last person assigned to the role of the registrar for that traveling exhibition wasn't actually a registrar. In fact, memory serves, she might have been on maternity leave and had a baby on her hip every time I spoke to her. Bless her, she was juggling more than I was. She wasn't a registrar, and her boss turned to her and said, don't worry about it. Maggie's got this. In fact, I did have this. I had all of the details committed to heart and to memory. I knew their checklist backwards and forwards. I knew the registrar for the past 3 venues and the future 3 venues. The trick was I wasn't their registrar. I had been a registrar before because I began my career as a registrar and moved into shipping and then moved back into registration. But I wasn't their registrar, I was their shipper. An educated consumer with a mutual respect for the roles of the vendors and for the collaboration between us yields the best possible services. We must know about the services that we're requesting to actually know what we're getting, to actually know that we're getting what we need and what our insurance providers and our lenders are requiring. The old days of registrars approaching one shipper, asking them to manage an entire exhibition, no matter the region, is really becoming a thing of the past. That model, going to one shipper saying whether the shipment's coming from Costa Rica or Florida, please just do the whole thing for me, it yielded less control on behalf of the registrar, less transparency, and frankly, a substantial increase in subcontracting markups. When I first moved back from shipping into registration, I was assigned to an exhibition that I had actually quoted for as a shipper, which was very helpful because I knew everything about it. It was kind of like a cheat. But in that first meeting where I was getting the handoff from a colleague of mine, we were talking about whether we as registrars should be handling our own subcontractors, or if we should be reaching out to our brokerage agents and letting them book all of the trucks. And I tried to explain from a position of having had my shipper hat 12 my shipper's hat 12 seconds ago, that I had done this estimate and that I had put a certain percentage of markup for the subcontract. And I, at the time, was approached by a lot of the people at the table with just kind of blank looks and, frankly, arguments about whether or not it was actually true that allowing somebody to do all of your bookings and all of your subcontracting would actually increase your budget. It was kind of a Twilight Zone moment when I had to say, no, I did this estimate and I marked it up, so turns out I'm telling the truth. Also, imagine speaking to your agents across the world in the wee hours of the morning, having them tell you to go to sleep and leave it to me. Without a strong working relationship and knowledge of their skill set and their capabilities, how would you realistically know whether to be shaking your fist at the phone or to have a moment of taking a breath of relief, being thankful that they actually do have this? Without this collaboration and this cross-training, it's a little bit of an open-ended question. Amy?
Thank you so much. Just to quickly wrap up before we move to the audience for questions and comments. As you can see from this panel, having this crossover experience has been beneficial to our current positions. Sorry, refer to that slide in a second. But not everyone has had this experience. So what we're hoping to encourage with this panel is the idea of crossover training at large. We had created a topic in the ARCS forum on the website, which was up there, and you can probably find it at some point again, where we invite you to post questions, feedback, idea for cross-training, share information, resources, and et cetera. Before we move on to questions, I just want to give a brief thank you and shout out to Lydia Rivera, who, without administering to this us and making sure that we were moving forward in an appropriate manner, this panel would have never happened. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much. And on that note, I think we're going to break for coffee.